Let's continue. If you're new here, you can go to the trailer, and if you are lost, you can go to the table of contents. This video is about fish oil, omega-3 fatty acids from fish oil. The bottom line here is if you're considering using it, you should know which dose and why. I'll try to get you there. And there's some fascinating research results that I think you ought to see in order to evaluate whether fish oil is for you or someone whom you love. So in summary, these are the three functions I think that fish oil can serve. Um, there's really good evidence from some studies, and then contrasting negative evidence, meaning like it didn't work that way, from other studies. So it's a little tricky to evaluate whether these things actually do these, whether fish oil really does these three things. And that's why I hope you're here to evaluate that yourself. Let's start with the prevention of psychosis, an amazing study, and then unfortunately one that didn't find the same thing. But take a look at this study, it's a stunner. So a group in Europe took a bunch of young people, 13 to 25-year-olds, who were at high risk for psychosis. They had had a short episode of psychosis, transient, went away, or they had a family history and they were kind of declining in function, what we've called the dwindles. This study went on for ultimately for 7 years, which is an amazing thing unto itself. They kept track of these young people for quite a while, almost all of them. And they were so in the graph is a little funny. The graph is starting out everybody doing well because that's how they were doing when the study began. And then they follow them over time. They randomized them to get either a placebo or fish oil pills for just 3 months. And so then I'll show you how the graph works. Watch what happens to the placebo group. Since everybody started out okay, what we're watching here is people getting not okay. And what you see is that about 40% of the group did develop psychosis. 60% of the group is still okay. Sorry about the graph. It's a little tricky to understand this way. And 40% of the group became psychotic. So the number of people who are still well, which is where everybody started, has decreased now down to 60% because 40% became psychotic over that 7-year period. It's worth understanding this graph because look at what happens to the group that got fish oil for just 3 months. This group only developed psychosis in 10%. In other words, 90% still well versus the 60% still well in the placebo group. It's just an amazing thing that they managed to follow these young people all the way out to 7 years, almost all of them. And the result is amazing. Unfortunately, there was this follow-up study based on that that did much the same thing, although everybody got high-quality cognitive behavioral therapy, and it was a much shorter study, as you can see. And so maybe that's why the placebo group and the fish oil group, there was no difference in the rates of developing a subsequent psychotic illness. So if you had a family member who was in that 13 to 25-year age range who had some kind of psychotic episode, or there was a strong family history of like schizophrenia, and someone was starting to have that dwindling, decreasing in function, um, I would think this would be a strong argument to consider taking fish oil in that circumstance, in part because the risks are so low. And the risks of doing nothing look like they could be really high. So the risks for fish oil, loose stool and nausea are relatively common. Fish burps, in my experience, is the thing that made people want to stop taking it. The simple solution is put the pills in the refrigerator in between doses or even in the freezer if that doesn't work. And that helps kind of makes them delayed release pills. So we have a somewhat open question about psychosis prevention. Those are the only two studies that I'm aware of. I might have missed some. So the next question, is it a mood stabilizer? Can we use this in bipolar disorders? And we have two studies to look at there. Again, one stunning and one that didn't find the same thing. This graph is set up in the same way. This study only goes on for 3 months. Again, everybody starts out well. Their mood is stable. The group that got a placebo pill that looks like the fish oil pill developed manic or depressive symptoms because even though these people's mood was stable, they were having difficulty. That's why they entered this study. And so more than half of them became symptomatic in this 3-month follow-up period, whereas the fish oil group, amazing. So this would be knock your socks off outcome. And there were even 8 people in this group who were on no medications at all. Let's see how they did. So 4 people in each group. And the fish oil people, none of them relapsed. 3 out of 4 of the placebo group did. That by itself is technically statistically significant, but it's a super small sample, obviously. So this study was then redone by a separate research group, and there was no difference between the fish oil group and the placebo group. So we have a positive study and a negative study, as we say. And what are you supposed to do with that? Well, again, I think because the risks are so low, it still remains something to consider trying as a mood stabilizer. In my experience, it just didn't seem to have a whole lot of clout. Like it didn't just really wasn't super impressive when it was added. But I've seen some people definitely go, oh yeah, that smoothed things out. So I think of it as kind of like a finishing agent, something to add on top of other things when you're not quite there. Now, does fish oil have an antidepressant effect? That's been much more studied. And the reason I think this is worth considering is because unlike conventional antidepressants or light or transcranial magnetic stimulation, all of them can destabilize in terms of causing increased cycling or mixed states. Fish oil, there's only one case report of hypomania, and I think because there's just one, I think that probably was not fish oil. We'd see more of that. We'd hear more about that if it was really so. So fish oil, I think that it's very likely that it does not increase cycling or cause mixed states. Mixed states, if you're not familiar with those, there's a separate set of videos, a playlist on mixed states. So now we're going to look at the research on fish oil as an antidepressant in people with plain or pure depression, unipolar depression. And it's extrapolation to go out into the middle of the mood spectrum. And then there's that set of studies out there in prevention of psychosis at the far end of the mood spectrum. You could stop here unless you're thinking about trying fish oil, because I've showed you the research except for the unipolar data. But the unipolar data, if you're going to think about doing fish oil, the unipolar data show us which kind and why. And if you were going to actually use fish oil, I think it would be worth knowing those things. So hang on, here we go, about another minute or two. There are lots of fish oils out there. This is a list that I made just going through the internet a while back. And you would encounter nearly the same variety in a grocery store with lots of shelves. So how do you choose amongst these things? Well, the bottom line here is you want the least expensive one that with the fewest pills will deliver 750 milligrams or 1,000 of EPA, and the pill itself is at least 60% EPA. So wait a minute, what are EPA? What are EPA and DHA? These are the omega-3 fatty acids. Most of these pills have some mix of the two, and that's the reason you have to try to select one that has it's sort of EPA heavy, 750 to 1,000 milligrams, and at least 60% is EPA. One way to do the math on that, if you're standing in the grocery store or trying to go through the internet, is the EPA basically twice as much EPA as DHA, or almost. that gets you to 2/3, right? 2/3 of it is EPA, and 1/3 is DHA, and that'd be 66%. So if you're almost there or there, then this pill is okay. And the reason to go through all that is because I went through this list some time ago and just did the math. Not all of the pill bottles show EPA and DHA, but amongst those that did, only 2 of this group met that all the way. Several of them were almost there. So I think there would be about like 5 candidates from this list. So that's the bottom line for what you're looking for. But if you're going to go through all that hassle, wouldn't you want to know why you're looking for that? So let's look at why. So in this graph, each diamond is a randomized trial, meaning like we saw 1 or 2 of those in the psychosis prevention, for example. This is like, what, 8 of them? And there's more. So it's amazing. There's so much research on fish oil as an antidepressant, not on the rest of those functions. In any case, each diamond in this graph is a randomized trial. And the farther to the, what direction am I going? The farther to your right as you look at this, that the dots are, the better it was compared to a placebo. So stronger results farther right, and weaker results farther left. And one study was actually not quite as good as a placebo, that one little outlier over there. But there were other studies. So this is at the time of this publication, this was the sum of them all. And in those other studies, in the white diamonds, it was nowhere near as strongly better than a placebo. And several of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, were not as good as a placebo. They were actually worse. The diamond, the white diamond, shows you the average for the white ones, and the black diamond is the average for the black ones. So when you put it all together, you could say, well, on balance, there were more positive studies than negative studies. But the reason they're black and white is because the fish oil was different. The black diamond studies used EPA that was 60%, used fish oil that was 60% EPA or more. Whereas the white study, the study shown in white here, the fish oil used was less than 60% EPA. That's where that whole do the numbers comes from. This routine. Now, you could do this and end up with a lot of pills. That isn't very handy. Or you could do this and end up with one that's expensive. So the hunt, then, if you're going to do this, is to find the least expensive one with the fewest pills that'll get you 750 to 1,000 of EPA. And the pill composition should be EPA twice the DHA, or almost 60% if you want to really do the math. That psychosis study, by the way, that was 60% EPA. So to summarize, fish oil has good data for efficacy, meaning it really works better than a placebo if you use the right stuff in plain old depression. And it's not, almost certainly not destabilizing like conventional antidepressants or light therapy or TMS, things that are clearly antidepressant. And the risk is just almost zero, just about. In older people, you have to be a little careful about drug interactions like with blood thinners, but that's about it. The evidence in the middle of the spectrum, not so good. One study yes, one study no. And then the evidence for prevention, similarly amazing, but not consistent. That's it for fish oil. I'm going to link the rest of the non-medications playlist here, or you can go back to the table of contents. Thanks for watching.